Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Depending upon what part of the world you live in, where I am near Toronto, it's morning, 10 o'clock, and it's nice and chilly. Went out for a breakfast this morning. I had to wear my sheepskin jacket, it was so cold, and my gloves. But we're prepared. So, welcome to Authors Circle live talk show. My name is Joe Groh, and I'm the host of Authors Circle. I'm also an advisor of Voice of Men 360. Voice of Men 360 is a nonprofit organization founded in 2020 and is based in Toronto, Canada. Voice of Men 360 was born out of seeing a tremendous need and stepping up to provide services to help support and overcome men's and boys' life challenges. We're part of International Men's Day. International Men's Day has been serving for over 21 years, and so far 90 countries around the world joining together and doing various activities regularly. International Men's Day follows six pillars, which is the overall well-being of boys and men. We follow in the same footsteps. Why do we have Author Circle? Well, Voice of Men 360 wants to recognize and appreciate the individuals who have been contributing in the various areas of men's issues through their writings. Participants around the world will be joining and sharing their contributions and experiences. The show runs on the third Saturday of every month from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Before I introduce our special guest today, I'd like to go through our disclaimer. We would like to remind you that Voice of Men 360's mission is always delivered with good faith and toward peaceful harmony. The views and opinions expressed in today's episode are those of our speaker and do not represent Voice of Men 360. Our organization engages in discussion forums to offer inspiration and create awareness to the issues of men who wish to overcome their life challenges. We're not providing medical or therapeutic advice. Should you require this type of assistance, we recommend you contact a medical professional immediately. If you have questions or concern about today's episode or any Voice of Men 360 content, please email us info at voiceofmen360.org. Today's guest is Ron Levant. He's a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Akron, past president of the American Psychological Association, and nicknamed APA and APA Division 51, and two-term editor of APA Division 51's quarterly journal, Psychology, Men, and Masculinities. He's widely considered one of the key people responsible for creating the new field of the psychology of men and masculinities. Can you give us an introduction to your book? We'd love to hear from Ron.
Can you unmute me? Okay.
Well, Ron, good morning. Good morning. I don't know what time it is over there since you're in another country, United States.
I am in Ohio where it's very cold. We're expecting a winter storm and it's 10:05 in the morning here.
Wow, same time. Wow. Well, I was out earlier, as I said earlier, I went for a breakfast and I had to wear my sheepskin jacket. It was so cold, minus 20 here, centigrade. I don't know what that is Fahrenheit. But the nice part, we definitely don't have a boring life with the different temperatures.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we're not quite as cold as that, but we do get some cold weather, some snow.
Well, I'm great. I'm so excited to see you because I thought it was just yesterday. It was November. We had an interview. So I'm happy to see your happy face, and you've got your full library behind you. So I know we'd need several months, if not years, to go through all the books you've read and that you've written. And we've got an exciting time today. I'm really looking forward to it. I could hardly sleep last night. I was so excited. Can hardly wait to see you again. And you've got a fascinating book. And tell us a little bit about it. And I'm going to be asking a few questions so the audience can learn more about your words of wisdom in your new book.
Well, thank you, Joe. The book is titled The Tough Standard, The Hard Truths About Masculinity and Violence. I co-authored it with Shana Pryor, who is a graduate student in counseling psychology at the University of Akron, and it was published by Oxford University Press in 2020. And basically what I tried to do in that book, what we tried to do in that book, was address kind of the facts that the vast majority of violence, whether it's physical or sexual violence, is committed by boys and men. Depending on what specific statistics you're looking at, it's well into the 90 percentile range. Yet, on the other hand, the vast majority of boys and men are not violent. Again, into the 90 percentile range. So we wanted to understand that and try to shed as much light on it as we could in order to reduce the rate of violence.
So, just out of curiosity, there's all sorts of different definitions thrown around about masculinity, femininity. How is usually the term masculinity understood by people, and how is it misunderstood? How would you analyze it? Do you go through that in your book?
We definitely do. We start off with that because the book is about masculinity, and we wanted readers to be aware of the two major ways that that word is understood. The first way is the way it's understood in conventional discourse, that is, just talking between average citizens. And that is, in that context, masculinity is viewed as synonymous with being male. On the other hand, in psychology and other social sciences, we think of masculinity a little bit differently, masculinity and femininity, as essentially gender norms, that is, social norms for behavior based on your biological sex, if you will. Social norms, we're all familiar with social norms. They're basically unwritten rules for how one should behave in particular situations. We have social norms for how close you can stand to a person, which obviously vary in different countries and cultures. And these gender norms also vary in different cultures and different historical eras. So it's really that definition of masculinity that the book addresses. And we underscore this difference so that people understand that when we offer some critical comments about masculinity, we are not criticizing men, that basically men do not all exhibit the same level of endorsement and conformity to masculinity norms. It's quite to the contrary. In fact, one of my studies showed that the vast majority of men basically reject these norms of masculinity as in terms of the way we score them. And so we kind of left with, well, okay, how do we understand that?
So, just out of curiosity, which aspect are the men rejecting of their view of masculinity from your perspective?
Well, all of them. And you reminded me I probably should say what they are. And that would probably be a good place to start. So there are different ways to define masculinity as a psychologist, a social scientist, but there's quite a bit of overlap. Since the 80s, I've developed and revised and refined a scale called the Male Role Norms Inventory, and it measures 7 gender norms. The first is to avoid all things feminine. It is not appropriate for boys and men to engage in any behavior that's stereotypically feminine. The second is restrict the expression of emotions, particularly vulnerable emotions, that is, emotions that make a person feel vulnerable, like fear or sadness, and as well as caring and connection emotions, because the most honored way to be a man is to essentially stand on one's own 2 feet and never need anything from anyone else. In addition, there is toughness, dominance, self-reliance through mechanical skills, placing a great deal of importance on sexuality, and having disdain for sexual minority men. And that kind of follows from the avoid femininity norm, because gay and bisexual men are sometimes considered feminine. And so that kind of goes with the territory. So those 7 norms are what are measured by my scale, and what essentially define what we call the beliefs about how boys and men are expected to think, feel, and behave. Now, essentially, I have a sample of about 1,004 men who took a version of the male role norms inventory, and the average score on the total scale score and on most of the 7 subscales reflecting these norms is toward the disagree end. The way these scales are set up is the participant is presented with a statement like the President of the United States should always be a man. Obviously, this is constructed in a U.S. context, not necessarily in a Canadian context. And then the participant is asked to what extent they agree or disagree on a 7-point scale ranging from strongly agree to strongly disagree, in which a neutral point that is in the middle, neither agree nor disagree, is 4.0. And the mean score over 1,000 men on most of the subscales and the total scale score was in the 3s, indicating that on average, men do not endorse these masculine norms.
So it appears that you're expanding quite a bit in your perspectives of masculinity compared to the old school method, or whatever method you would want to term it as, the man that stands on his own, as you said, and has a difficult time expressing emotions and feelings, and the terminology that suck it up and don't let people see you cry. And from your studies, have you come to the conclusion that that can result in some problematic health issues with the man if he retains those emotions and doesn't express the truth, what's really going on? If you ask a man how he's doing, he'll say he's okay or he's fine. But the reality is inside, he's dying inside.
Yes. Well, thank you for making that point, Joe. That is an extremely important point. And you're absolutely right, about the picture you painted. This topic of masculinity using scales like mine has been studied since the 80s. In fact, the first scale, the first masculinity scale, was developed by David Brannon and published in 1984. And over the 4+ decades that we've been studying masculinity, we have produced a large number of research studies, and the vast majority of the findings link a masculinity scale, of which there are a number, not just my own, but several others, and with harmful outcomes. And you mentioned health. Indeed, with regard to health, and we're living through a health crisis right now with the pandemic, that men in the U.S., again, I have to speak from what I know, which is U.S. statistics, but men in the United States die on average about 5 years sooner than do women. They also, men in the United States, have greater morbidity, that is illness, in all major categories of illness. And furthermore, that this is connected to not so much, one would think that there might be some biological basis for this, and there are some small influences, but the big factor is health behaviors. Men engage in about 30 controllable behaviors that increase their risk for illness, injury, and disease. They use more tobacco products, they consume more alcohol, they don't wear seatbelts, they visit physicians less often, they don't take medications as prescribed, they may not even fill the prescription, they have poorer diets, they do not regularly exercise, and on and on. And also, they respond to a lot of situations with anger. And though this has kind of dropped out of the headlines, but 30 years ago, we were connecting anger with the type A personality and cardiovascular risk. So masculinity is problematic in this regard with regard to men's health. And it's also related to the fact that in the current pandemic, we might as well bring this home to what we're suffering through today, that I'm sure you and your audience knows that men in the pandemic, at least in the US, get more severe infections than women, as measured by intensive care unit admissions, and they die more frequently. And while, again, there are some biological factors that are involved here, masculinity plays a huge role in men's reluctance to engage in mitigation practices that the American Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommend: masking, social distancing, et cetera, as well as vaccinations and boosters.
So would you say that the fact that men do their utmost to be self-made man and say that I can do it on my own, I don't need anybody, and I don't want anybody to see that I have some health issues or I'm suffering in an area to show any so-called weakness, that this boomerangs back into them and can cause some serious issues such as addictions? Would you say that addictions could result in the men's lack of communicating the truth of what's really going on in their life? They're too scared or too fearful or uncomfortable or shameful or guilty, whatever you want to call it, with really expressing the real them, the real person. In your case, the real Ron, the real Joe. They're hiding it from the rest of society because they're scared that people would be running away if they found out who they really were.
Well, that opens up a whole topic. That is, what happens when you tell little boys, 4, 5, 6 years old, that masculinity is obligatory, that they have no choice but to conform to masculine norms, that, they dasn't cry. Boys don't cry, right?
Mm-hmm.
They dasn't show any weakness. So what happens when boys are socialized to conform to that restrictive emotionality norm? Well, back in the early 90s, I proposed that that leads to adult men having an inability to identify and describe their emotions. There's a technical term for this, which is alexithymia, which is spelled Alexithymia, which literally means without words for emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the 90s, after reviewing developmental psychology literature findings, research findings on emotion socialization in boys and girls, I theorized that boys who are reared to conform to the restrictive emotionality norm of masculinity have a high likelihood of growing up to be men who are at least mildly alexithymic. And we demonstrated that through a meta-analysis, which is a way of aggregating statistically many, many different studies, and showed that when studies that compared men and women on various alexithymia scales, that men met criteria, whatever the criteria were for that scale, more frequently than did women. It was a small effect, but it was a significant effect. But most psychological sex differences are small effects, 78% of them, in fact, of those that have been studied. So when boys grow up to be alexithymic men, these men have a real problem in giving an account of their inner lives. When asked how they feel, they'll tell you what they think or what they're going to do. And why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem in several ways. It's a problem for relationships. Most relationships, other than the most superficial, require disclosure of your emotions. How do you feel about things? How do you feel about me? How do you feel about what I just did? And men who cannot identify and describe their emotions have problems in relationships. Some men don't even understand that intimacy can be achieved through conversation. I had a client many years ago who, told me that his wife complained that she wanted more intimacy. And his thought in relationship to that request was, well, what does she want me to do rip her clothes off when she comes in the door and make mad, passionate love to her? In other words, he could not conceive of intimacy in any other way than sexual intimacy. The idea that you could be intimate with a person by talking to them and sharing your innermost feelings never occurred to him. So he's not unique. I mean, I'm sure your audience knows men who fit the descriptions I'm giving.
Well, isn't that a common complaint a lot of women have?
It is.
Why is that all men want? All they want is sex. But the reality is that's not what all women want. Is they want communication, security, and to be able to share what's really going on. And if a man, as a boy, was raised in an environment where he's told to suppress his emotions and don't cry and don't show weakness and just suck it up and handle it, then how is he in a position to learn how to do that? What would be the steps he'd need to take to overcome those lack of expressing his true feelings? What could he do?
Well, that's a great question, and it's really the most important thing that men can do today. Men who meet some of the criteria we've been describing here, men who cannot give a good account of their emotions. There are a number of options. There are men's groups of different kinds that are available in local communities. There are national organizations like the Mankind Project, for example. There are professionals who work with men, psychologists and counselors and social workers and people of, professionals of that type who can help a man learn to identify his emotions. I developed a manualized psychotherapeutic treatment for men that can be built into standard psychotherapy of any type. It's called alexithymia reduction treatment. And there's a big thing in psychology about writing manuals for what we do so we can kind of evaluate scientifically whether they're working by ensuring that the inputs we're trying to create actually go in. And so this particular one essentially starts out by asking men to develop a vocabulary for emotion words. Many men have a very limited vocabulary for emotion words. I mean, they might have anger, a lot of words for anger, angry, irritated, enraged, pissed off, you name it. They'll also have words for being stressed out. I'm zapped, I'm stressed out, I'm just, over the top. But they have very few words for emotions like fear and sadness and guilt and longing for another person or any of those kinds of emotions. So you're first of all encouraging the man or the client in this case to think about words that describe the emotions, the full spectrum of emotions. Secondly, I will teach my clients a little bit about sort of the nonverbal expression of emotions through tone of voice, facial expression, and body language. And ask them to focus on other people for the next week and ask themselves the question as they observe another person, a member of their family, a coworker, what have you. What are they feeling when they say that? And learn how to connect, observable behavior to unobservable emotions. Then I ask them to keep what I call an emotional response log. Now, a lot of the clients I've worked with can't even identify, couldn't, I should say, even identify whether they're having an emotion. They would have some physical sensation in their body, like butterflies in my stomach, or I feel like I've got a tight band across my forehead, or, my shoulders feel very tight. So they'll talk about a bodily sensation. And that's the best they can do. So in this exercise, I ask men to kind of keep handy some 3x5 cards so they can kind of write things down. And when they notice either that they're having an emotion, in the rare case that the man could identify an emotion, or when they're having one of these bodily sensations that he and I think are related to emotion, to write it down. Okay, 10:15 a.m. Tuesday. Um, Feeling a little uneasy, some butterflies in my stomach. Then the second question is, who is doing what to whom and how does that affect you? Okay, so his next entry might be, I was waiting for some feedback on my project proposal, and it's, supposed to come at noon, and here it is 4 o'clock, and I haven't gotten any, and I think that's a bad sign. Okay, third step, go through that vocabulary list that you created and pick out the word or words that describe what you're feeling. So he does, apprehensive, worried. Maybe this didn't get the best review. So you can see how this works. It's really,
Mm-hmm.
I consider, kind of just basic steps.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
I like it. It's a very good idea. I would compare it to if you were interested in losing weight, you would keep track of what food you're going to be eating, not eating, or if you wanted to improve your money management habits, you're keeping track through a record of log what money you're spending, what you got coming in. I like it, especially it must be challenging for men that have never done this before and thought that if they ever expressed fear or anger emotions like that, it would make them appear that they're weak and spineless. So that must be quite an interesting experience for men that have never done this before.
well, you hit on a very good point, and that is, uh, you know, given what I said earlier, that most boys are made to feel that being masculine is obligatory. And even though most adult men do not um, endorse tradition or conform to traditional masculine norms, how is it that that occurs? And uh, I've just lost the train of thought. What were we? What was the thing we were talking about?
What I
Oh,
was talking about is
yeah,
keeping track of what they're feeling compared to other people. This must be quite uncomfortable for them because they probably never done this before, or they wouldn't need your assistance.
right. Well, the thing that really needs to happen is they need to kind of um, be supported to realize that even though as a little boy they were made to feel that this was a bad thing to do, to express these, to say that they're afraid or they're sad, um, that's really wrong, and nobody is going to judge them badly for expressing their emotions. As a matter of fact, people close to them will be grateful that they really know how you feel and where you stand and what's going on in your life. So I try to encourage my clients, to revisit those prohibitions that they learned as little boys, and overlearned, I should say, and that it's shameful for men to express emotions, and to revise those attitudes, and kind of let themselves know that no, it's not shameful. Um, it's healthy, as a matter of fact.
Well, it must be quite an interesting challenge for you and for them if the man has come from a background as a child that he was emotionally, verbally, and physically abused and put down and humiliated. Um, I know several men that's happened because men's groups are very near and dear to my heart, so I can relate fully to what you're describing in terms of men finding it a challenge to express their feelings, express their emotions. Women find it much easier being the nurturing gender. So how simple and easy would it be from your experiences helping men to overcome that to be much stronger in their ability to express what's going on and feeling stronger emotionally to help them heal through their lives?
Surprisingly, it's a lot easier than you would think. One of the studies I did with my colleague here at the University of Akron, Dr. Phil Allen, was we wanted to see. I had theorized that socializing boys to restrict the expression of emotions occurred on a continuum of severity, from mild to extremely bad. And as a result, I postulated several psychological defense mechanisms that might operate in different circumstances. So, for example, if a boy is simply told, boys shouldn't express fear and they shouldn't express sadness, and please don't do that, they might suppress their feelings, but they remain aware of them. They remain aware that they are sad or fearful or whatever the feeling might be, but they know that it's not appropriate to express them. And this is called suppression.
Mm-hmm.
Men who were socialized more severely, and a lot of the socialization, by the way, comes from the peer groups, other boys, police, boys' expressions of masculinity. Well, they might not be able to identify what they're feeling without some psychological help. And this mechanism is called repression. That is, they have no conscious awareness of the emotion they're experiencing. And the third level is boys who are severely traumatized for violating masculine norms. And in these boys, not only would they not be able to bring the feeling into awareness, but it would have kind of fragmented. And we call this mechanism dissociation, which is a common mechanism in trauma survivors. Now, in the study we did, we wanted to see, and these were healthy college students, basically. So we didn't expect a lot of dissociation or even much repression. And that is what we found, that the vast majority of our male college student population, basically their alexithymia, and we measured that using a well-validated scale, the Toronto alexithymia scale, and with certain published criteria for cutoffs,
Mm-hmm.
that basically the reason for their alexithymia was suppression. They could experience their emotions. They chose not to. Chose not to share them or show them.
That's very fascinating.
The good news is probably most men can be helped, without an intensive psychotherapeutic experience, but just some, it could be a friendly conversation, man to man. It could be a men's group. It could be somebody in the family talking to the man and saying, look, it would help you as well as us if you could realize that it's not shameful to express your emotions. We'd like to know more about what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yes, bottling up inside, it would be, I would compare it to trying to prevent a volcano from erupting.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, you can't keep holding on to it forever. Eventually, something's going to manifest itself, whether it's cancers, ulcers, whatever it might be, heart attacks. It could result in things like that. So, in a situation, there's two other areas I'm just curious what you've experienced or learned or studied. Let's say if it's a situation where the boy was raised in a single parent home with a mother. So, how would he obtain the right direction masculinity? Another area I'd love to find out is if a boy was constantly bullied at school and constantly picked on.
Oh, picked on. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you basically have mentioned a very, very important topic. It goes by the title, The Essential Father Hypothesis. And this was an academic theory back in the 70s. And it derived from Freudian psychoanalytic theory, which is largely disregarded today for the most part, but particularly the Oedipal conflict, in which the 4 to 6 year old boys develop a romantic interest in their mothers, which they later renounce in favor of identifying with their father's masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
So this theory proposed that fathers played an essential role in boys' development to model masculinity and heterosexuality for their sons.
Mm-hmm.
But the research never really provided much support for that idea. It was also, that particular theory was in its heyday when men did very little childcare in the 1960s, and that's kind of when this theory was current. These time diary studies that are very rigorous, in which participants are asked to fill out what they're doing in 15-minute segments and diaries, that showed that fathers spent very little time in parenting. 6 minutes a day, a tenth of an hour a day. That was it. So it was associated with kind of, the idea that the father was simply there to model this masculinity and heterosexuality for his sons. Now, given what I've told you and your audience about the problematic aspects of masculinity, about, essentially the problems of requiring boys to conform to masculine norms, you might wonder, is this really a good thing? Well, it turns out it's not, and but it still occurs. I mean, research that I've reviewed many studies show that fathers still behave as if their role is to be the keeper of gender roles in the family, not only with their sons, but also with their daughters. And they tend to, reinforce stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. I did one study. There's this long-standing set of studies looking at how fathers relate differently to boys and girls. These would be fathers studied in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, that fathers relating to their sons, when the son is faced with a challenging task, the father will demand that the son figure it out. He won't give any hints, and he'll, sort of require his son to struggle through it. The same father with a daughter faced with a similar challenging task will move in to make it easier or fun. So what message is this sending boys and girls? It's telling boys, you've got to stand on your own 2 feet. Telling girls, you need to depend on men to solve problems for you, like daddy is doing right now. And so this kind of differential parenting, as I think anybody can easily see, is problematic. Girls grow up to be women who are CEOs and senators and vice presidents in the United States, and obviously girls need to learn how to figure out problems on their own and struggle through difficult situations just as much as boys do. And boys do not need to be made to feel bad for not conforming to masculine norms. There's another implication of this I want to bring out, and that is effeminacy. That is effeminate behavior. So back in the 60s, 50s and 60s, boys showing effeminate behavior were thought to be at risk for great psychological problems. There's a video that I used to show when I taught group counseling at the university, which basically was a group therapy with boys, 11 to 14-year-old boys. And it was activity group therapy, because when you do therapy with children, it's not like therapy with adults. You don't sit down in chairs and talk, but you interact around some activity, whether it's play therapy or, in this case, activity group therapy. And so the therapy room was set up like a wood shop. I mean, many of us as boys had to go to wood shop. And but the interesting thing about this film is the boys, 11 of the 14 boys, were referred to a child guidance clinic for effeminate behavior. That was considered to be such a significant prognosticator for later problems that parents routinely would send their sons who were not appropriately masculine for psychological treatment at a child guidance clinic. Just to give you some perspective, nowadays, probably the primary reason for a parent or a teacher referring a boy, to treatment is what would it be? ADHD, right?
Yes, of course. What I wanted to ask, and since your time is going down, I could tell I'm finding it so fascinating talking to you. We could be on here for another 5 hours. I don't think your wife would like that. I know you want to have some time with her. So I'd love to just quickly cover one question we had from a Facebook user. Even though they spent very little time parroting, how important do you believe modeling behavior is? And then just cover a little bit of some of your other books and works, and then we're going to need to wrap up soon, or we'll be here all day. I can tell, Ron.
I can't do it. I've got other things scheduled. You do too. Well, modeling, is one of the principal ways that children learn, and it's what you model. Okay, so back in the day of the heyday of the essential father hypothesis, the idea was to model the strong silent type, the John Wayne character, the tough, stoic, unemotional man. Nowadays, I think what we try to model, what we encourage fathers and mothers to model, is a flexible behavior and the ability to talk about one's inner life and freely expressing affection and things of that nature. But modeling as a psychological process is very important for how people learn essentially adult roles.
I agree. Can you share a little bit of some of your other books or projects you're working on that you feel could benefit some of the people in our audience?
Sure. Well, subsequent to the book we've been talking about, I was invited to essentially write a theoretical paper on gun violence, kind of going from the fact that the vast majority of gun violence is committed by boys and men, and the vast majority of boys and men are nonviolent, a point I mentioned earlier. I wanted to understand what psychological factors might predispose some boys and men to commit gun violence. So I turned to the predominant theory in the psychology of men and masculinities, that is the gender role strain theory, which posits that socializing children to conform to gender roles creates psychological strain, one of which is called discrepancy strain, which is basically a disconnect between your ideal self and your real self. So ideally, a man might think of himself as very masculine, but in reality, he doesn't always behave in that way. He would experience discrepancy strain, which is a very unpleasant feeling. It's like cognitive dissonance, and it basically drives people to behave in accordance with their ideals, either by changing their ideals or changing their behavior. Okay, so I found that in quite a number of studies that tried to get at gun violence, but you can't really do a study that creates gun violence, or even physical violence. So we have to use indicators, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. But the biggest, most important factor that differentiated those boys and men who were likely to become physically violent using some indicator was either feeling that they didn't measure up to their internal standards, or that they were experimentally induced to feel that way by being asked to perform a feminizing task, like putting ribbons in a mannequin and braiding her hair, things of that nature.
Or washing dishes.
The other thing I found, what's that? I'm sorry.
Or washing dishes.
Or washing.
So I'm just curious if some member of the audience would like to get in touch with you for some assistance or learn more about the books and programs you're working on. Is there a method that would be best suited to be able to contact you?
Yeah, my website, which is all one word, drronaldlevant.com. It's not case specific, just drronaldlevant.com. And they can, there's a message app in that website. This is actually a website set up more for researchers than for the general public, but people from the general public are welcome to go there, and they can, essentially communicate with me through the comment app.
If we can answer this question briefly, would be good. Can you share your views on whether fathers are seen as a secondary co-parent and social legal systems are typically designed to ensure imbalance remains and sustains between opposite genders? We have very little time left, but is there a way you can answer that quickly, or would they need to contact you for a better answer?
Well, I'll try to answer it very quickly. It depends on who you ask, but I think if you ask mothers, um, you will hear that they want their husbands to be full partners in childcare and parenting and the like. Um, the, in contrast to the idea of the essential father, I think that the father of today, is the co-parent, the dad who gets up in the morning, gets his kids dressed and fed and off to daycare or school, or picks them up in the afternoon and gets them settled in their homework and evening routines. A father who rolls up his sleeves and is not afraid, to provide care to his children.
Very good, very good. So we have the website information set up, and I know this program is recorded, so I'm sure we're going to have people contact you, and I greatly appreciate, and it's been a true honor and pleasure having you here today, and we look forward to seeing you one day again in the future. So keep us abreast of any news, any new developments, or any experiences that you can share that would assist us.
Thank you, Joe. It was very nice of you to have me on the show today.
Yes, it was great having you. Stay warm.
Mm-hmm.
And enjoy your wonderful Saturday with your wonderful wife today.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I have a few announcements that I'd like to share with everyone. And Voice of Men 360 is running a special campaign. It's called Self-Care for Indigenous Men from December 22nd to January 31st. So we can see the poster up here right now. So what we're looking for are gift cards, deodorants, razors, disposable socks, hand towels. Those are the main things we're looking to collect. So if you're in a position that you'd like to donate for this, that would be greatly appreciated. And we're doing what we can to help the rest of the world and contribute. If you prefer to send an e-transfer, it can be sent to info@voiceofmen360.org. Voice of Men 360 will be celebrating Tamil Heritage Month on Saturday, January 22nd, evening from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time through Zoom as well. There will be a special panel discussion on Saturday, January 29th from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. This is to recognize International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Men and Boys on January 31st. Panelists from around the world will be participating, so please join in. And we have a few regular live shows open up, sharing your personal life journey. It's a live talk show. It's on Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. As well, Tamil live talk shows on Sundays at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Monthly webinar for Saturday of every month at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So bring your expertise, organizations, and discuss a particular topic each time. We have an interesting show as well, monthly special show called Unspoken Tears, second Saturday of every month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. The focus is domestic violence against men, bullying, male sexual abuse, traumas, porn addiction, and human trafficking. So those are some of the things. This is our second program on Author Circle. We'll be continuing every third Saturday of the month. We did it 10 a.m. It may change to 11 a.m. So keep in touch. We'll keep you posted of the schedule. And thank you, Wayne, for the comment there. We look forward to hearing from everyone. And I hope that today's interview benefited, because I found it fascinating. I really enjoyed Ron Levant's insight and wisdom and experience and the studies and the books. So get in touch with him, see what you can do to obtain some great ideas to move forward. So many men are struggling with keeping their emotions and feelings inside and not really sharing what's really going on. And for those little tip from a course that I gave a little while ago, when someone says to you they're fine or they're okay, they're not doing very good. So try and dig a little deeper and get the real emotion out of them. So thank you again, everyone, for showing up today. We'd like to keep you posted as to what's happening. We also have a South Asian men's show, third Sunday every month from 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. So Voice of Men 360 and All Bengal Men's Forum will be hosting the show. We'll be specifically focusing on the issues faced by South Asian men and create awareness. Each month, different countries will participate from South Asia. We have a podcast. All of our shows are available on 6 platforms, including iPhone, Google Play, and so on. Monthly men's group meeting only for men by men every 2 weeks on Tuesdays from 6 to 7:30 through Zoom. The next one will be on Tuesday, January 25th. Please join through Zoom. The link is available on our Facebook page and group. And we have another group. I love the name of this one, Pass the Talking Stick, Indigenous Peer-to-Peer Support Group. It's fourth Friday of every month from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. through Zoom. So with Author Circle, there's no limitations with gender, age, nationality, or ethnic groups. All walks of life can participate in any of our shows. If you want to be a guest in any of our shows or willing to be part of our organization and help us directly, indirectly, please reach out to us. We'd love to work with individuals, professionals, experts, community organizations, associations, corporations, government officials, and businesses. The phone number that we can be reached at is 437-889-8329. Email address info@voiceofmen360.org. Website www.voiceofmen360.org. You can find us on all the social media, Facebook group, also Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. And you please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Voice of Men 360. We want to reach out to more people and help more, so please continue your support. Thank you again for your attendance today. It was awesome, everyone that showed up. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful Saturday. Take care.